butterflies are neither as numerous or as large in Britain as in some sunnier climes. Yet even in this country they are widespread during the summer months, and when viewed at close quarters have a fascinating range of the most beautiful colours and patterns. Quite naturally, many people, when thinking of butterflies, think of those varieties which are most frequently seen in our gardens, like the peacock and the small tortoiseshell, the red admiral, who comes all the way up from the Mediterranean to join us, and, of course, the comma with his deeply indented wings. But there are lots of others which rarely come near a garden, as they breed and feed on grasses and wild flowers, like this little green hair streak, which may be found in a place like this, amongst these sort of flowers. Or like the brimstone, which prefers a woodland area. We must always look for butterflies in their own particular natural habitat. But first let's have a look at some of the whites. This, the large white, and its cousin, the small white, are the two whose caterpillars cause such devastation amongst cabbages. But there are a number of white butterflies with quite blameless characters, like this green-veined white, which will often be found in the garden but is uninterested in the cabbage patch, preferring the lady's smock, the hedge garlic, or the charlock on which to lay its eggs. The very attractive little wood white is only found in a very few counties, of which Herefordshire is one. It looks for leguminous plants on which to lay its eggs, plants like this tufted vetch. It has a rather charming habit when courting. The pair will sit facing one another, while the male gently strokes the face of the female with his antennae. If she finds his attentions agreeable, she shows her approval by flicking her wings. Now, if the second one here was a male, he's rather a slow starter. Then a more enterprising suitor arrived. The marbled white is of quite a different family, and really belongs to the browns. It is only found in a limited number of localities, and we are fortunate in having a strong colony established in an area near Fownhope. Its caterpillar feeds on grasses, the female butterfly dropping her eggs casually among the grass as she flies over. The bold patterning makes it a handsome and conspicuous insect. Now, the little orange tip can usually be found flitting about the countryside about the same time as the cuckoo is first heard. Only the male has the orange wingtip, the female being blessed with only a black tip to her wings. But both male and female have this strongly mottled reverse to their wings. The lady's smock, or cuckoo flower, which is in full bloom at this time, is one of the flowers on which she likes to lay her tiny egg. The hedge garlic, or jack by the hedge as it is often known, is another. The little eggs, bright orange in colour, are laid singly on the flower stems. Only their bright colour makes them visible to the naked eye. Here they remain for a week or two before hatching out into tiny orange caterpillars with dark heads. At this stage, the caterpillar is about 2 to 3 millimeters long and about as thick as a piece of cotton. It'll live a solitary life, for the probability is that if it met another, it would either eat or be eaten by the other one. In a few days it has changed its colour to green and becomes almost invisible, lying on the stems or on the seed pods of the flowers, and growing steadily through the ensuing weeks. Sometimes it feeds on stems, sometimes on leaves or seed pods. But all the time it gets bigger. Eventually, it grows into a monster about 1.5 inches long. Now it prepares for the next stage in its life. It must find a more permanent support, as it will spend some 10 months as a chrysalis. It finds what it wants in a beech branch, pupates and hangs itself up there. But how did it manage to attach itself to the branch with that silken girdle around its middle? To answer that, we must go back to the caterpillar after it had found the branch it wanted. First, the tail end is fixed securely to the branch. Then, producing thread from its mouth, it fastens one end to the branch, passes it right round over its back, and fastens it off on the other side, then brings it back and completes the job by fastening it again to the near side. The girdle is now fixed and supports the front part of the caterpillar. It still holds on with the rear pair of claspers. Finally, it lies back into the girdle, the claspers release their hold, and it is supported only by tail and girdle. And next day it is a chrysalis, supported by that fine silken girdle we saw. In a few days the colour has changed, so that it is almost indistinguishable from the beech buds, and so it awaits resurrection next spring. With the disappearance of elm trees from the countryside through Dutch elm disease, it was feared that the little white hair streak might become extinct in this area, as the elm, particularly the wych elm, is the food plant of the caterpillar. The survival of a few wych elms in a wood near Hereford has sustained a small colony so far. It gets its name from the little white streaks on the reverse of the wings, which sometimes bears some resemblance to a W. Size is not synonymous with beauty in the butterfly world any more than elsewhere. The brown argus is barely 1.25 inches across its wings, but what a beauty it is in close-up. This is the female, larger and more handsome than the male. Note the attractive beaded effect of the antennae. The rock rose is the main food plant for the larvae. The large skipper is only slightly larger than the brown argus, whilst the small skipper is smaller than either, barely exceeding 1 inch in diameter with the wings spread. But see what a beautiful fur cloak she has. Tinier still is the grizzle skipper, less than an inch across. The larvae have a number of food plants, including wild strawberries. The little green hair streak we have already seen earlier. The top side of the wings is an undistinguished brown. It is the reverse which shows the string of white dots on the rich green background from which its name is derived. Although called the small copper to distinguish it from the large copper, this one is substantially larger than the very little ones we've just been looking at. It is a very fast flyer, and each butterfly seems to have its own territory, with a focal point from which it leaps out to chase other butterflies away. The common dock and the sorrel are plants on which it lays its eggs. The only thing that is common about the common blue is its name, for it is a charming little creature, both for the brilliant blue of its wings when open, and the richly coloured pattern of the reverse side of the wings. The female has less blue and more brown in her colouring on both sides of the wings. The difference in the colouring between the sexes can be clearly seen in this little mating episode here. And yet both have this beautiful pattern on the reverse. The favourite plants for the common blue to lay its eggs on are the rest harrow and the yellow trefoil. Rather similar at first glance is the holly blue, but it lacks the rich coloration of the reverse side of the wings. Eggs are laid on the holly tree, hence its name. The egg is shaped like a tiny dome and is a pretty grey blue in colour. Small pin's head on the right here gives some idea of how minute the egg really is. The caterpillar is correspondingly small, barely half an inch long when fully grown, dull and sluggish in its movements. And yet, from this little caterpillar comes this very delightful little butterfly. The meadow brown is one of the most prolific but least colourful of all our butterflies. It flutters about near the ground and never travels any great distance. The hedge brown is another plentiful variety which always stays close to where it hatches out. Perhaps this is how it has earned for itself the nickname of the gatekeeper. This variant of the hedge brown had all the areas on wings and body, which are normally rich chestnut in colour, replaced by light creamy white areas, thereby making a beautiful and conspicuous insect. The speckled wood seldom strays far from woodland, its natural habitat. Some caterpillars of this variety pupate in the autumn and spend the winter as chrysalis, but the majority hibernate in grass tussocks and pupate in the spring. The ringlet is a real dusky beauty if ever there was one. It is in fact one of the few butterflies that will fly on a dull, wet day. The reverse of the wings gives the reason for its name. The brimstone is often one of the earliest butterflies to appear in the spring, a second brood appearing in late July or early August. A beautiful variety, which we do not see much of except on the eastern side of the county. The female is much paler than the male, often a little more than white with just a yellowish tinge to it. There isn't room on this flower for both butterfly and bee, so the butterfly goes and the bee remains. The other yellow butterfly we sometimes see is the clouded yellow, a migrant from southern Europe. Many years may pass without us seeing any here in Herefordshire, but there were a fair number about in the late summer of 1983. When sitting on fields of clover or lucerne, with their wings closed like this one, they have been described as looking like so many golden coins scattered about the field. They seem to only open their wings when actually in flight. The silver-washed fritillary is the largest and the most handsome of our fritillaries. It is a strong, fast flyer as it swoops across the countryside, a flash of brilliant, fast-moving colour. It is perhaps the most exciting of all our butterflies. It gets its name from the flush of silvery grey-green on the underside of its wings. The painted lady is a migrant from North Africa, where it breeds in vast numbers. A limited number usually reach us here in Herefordshire, sometimes more, sometimes less. One of the features about it is the particularly beautiful reverse to the wings. Eggs are laid on the upper surface of thistle leaves. The white admiral is comparatively scarce, and usually only found in a few pockets of woodland in this area, the best one being near the border with Gloucestershire. Generally up among the branches of trees, it will also come down to feed on things on the ground. And this one finally landed on the photographer's hand, thereby posing great focusing problems. Not for the first time he found himself wishing he had 3 hands. The wild honeysuckle is the food plant for the caterpillar. The butterfly and the flower making a very beautiful combination. The very handsome red admiral, another migrant from the Mediterranean, is much more widely distributed and is a frequent visitor to our gardens, being particularly fond of buddleia blossom and overripe fruit. This one hatched out in captivity, seeming to be quite at home for a day or two in the house, where it would sit happily enough on a finger or a shoulder, a mixture of glucose, sugar and honey seemed to meet its feeding requirements. Now, notice here the curious barred pattern of the eye. The eyes, of course, of a butterfly are quite different to ours, being compound and made up of thousands of facets. The comma is another that enjoys both buddleia and overripe fruit. At the turn of the century it was restricted to an area in the Wye Valley just below Monmouth, but now it is widespread throughout the country. It gets its name from the little white hieroglyphic resembling a comma on the reverse of the wing. A variant here, not in colour, but in the shape of the cutaway wings. The caterpillar matches the slightly bizarre appearance of the butterfly. It gives the impression of having half fallen into a pot of white paint. Perhaps the most colourful and the beautiful of all our butterflies is the gorgeous peacock, well known to most people because it is so partial to buddleia flowers in the garden. In the countryside it is most generally attracted to thistles in flower. Eggs are laid in thick clusters on nettles where the black caterpillars feed until pupating. The small tortoiseshell, almost if not quite as beautiful, also lays her eggs in clusters on nettles, and the habits of these last two seem very similar. When the little caterpillars hatch out, they remain in a cluster and draw a leaf round themselves, sewing it into position with silken threads. Unlike the solitary orange-tip caterpillar, they are extremely gregarious, and life for them is very much on a community basis all the way through, though as they get bigger they spread out more onto the plant. For between 2 and 3 weeks they live entirely on nettle leaves. When the caterpillar reaches full size, it suddenly stops eating and searches for a place to pupate. As they only have to make provision for 2 weeks as a chrysalis, there is no need to search beyond the nettle itself. And when it finds a suitable leaf, it hangs itself up from its tail and curls up. Next, it must get rid of its caterpillar skin, and this it proceeds to do from the head upwards, shrugging the skin off towards the tail end. Finally, the skin is worked right off and falls onto a leaf below. The caterpillar is now a chrysalis. is attached to a little pad on the stem of the nettle leaf. Then the touch of Midas, and it becomes a casket of pure gold. And now one of nature's amazing miracles takes place. Inside that casket, the whole structure of the caterpillar breaks down into a milky fluid. Then a new and a more glorious body is formed. Through the outer casing of the chrysalis, colors begin to show and get stronger. Then, suddenly it splits open at the bottom. The butterfly emerges head downwards, just as the caterpillar was when it pupated. Its first job is to climb up and find a position where it can hold on, while the wings hang downwards to straighten out. The wings were soft, damp and crumpled when it emerged. Hanging down like this, they straighten up in a matter of minutes, but they still need to dry and stiffen. Blood is being pumped into them. And now we can see the proboscis, or the tongue, coiled like a watch spring. It's being got into operation. It is through this that the butterfly will get all its nourishment in the form of liquids. It has no jaws to eat with like the caterpillar had. Finally it settles down for a half-hour snooze in front of the empty chrysalis casing, the antennae lying flat down its back. At last, it wakes up and starts to climb to the top of the stem. Arriving at the top, there's a brief pause, and then it launches itself into its new world and its new life among the flowers. And so another of nature's beauty queens joins in the pageant of glowing colours and fluttering wings. Pageant renewed each year when warmer weather and lengthening days brings round again the time for butterflies.